also wooden circles called Woodhenge, and there are a few remains, timber temples standing down in the south part here. I'm sure everybody's heard of Stonehenge being the most famous, and was used as a sacred agricultural calendar, primarily the heel stone up here on the summer solstice would reflect the first light of the new summer season, which would come right into the inner sanctum of Stonehenge, where the Druid people are still allowed to perform. Somebody pointed out to me at another lecture that now there's a great big fence that surrounds Stonehenge, so it's not quite the intimate feel that you could have gotten 10 or 15 years ago and walked right up to them. But many have been damaged by vandals, so it's probably a good thing. Some astronomical computations that can be made are predicting moonrises, eclipses of the moon and sun, as well as the solstices and equinoxes. Out on the outer ring here, this is a very deep ditch at one time, may have even contained water, but on the inside of the ring were holes that were recently discovered called Aubrey holes. So there were all these successive layers of rings where the astronomer priests of the day could have garnered quite a bit of information for use in farming or whatever ceremonies they performed back then. So just to quickly give you a synopsis of some of the sites in Europe, which I find quite fascinating. This is a shot of Delphi in Greece, right below sacred Mount Parnassus. In Delphi is the temple of Apollo, whose inscription is "Know thyself." Love that quote. And below the Apollo temple is a subterranean chamber where in ancient pagan times a young maiden, preferably a virgin, would sit above a fissure in the rock where natural gases from the earth would emit. She would go into trance, and when pilgrims from commoners to emperors to generals would travel all the way to Delphi to hear the sacred oracle, she would listen to the question, and her response would be speaking in tongue in an unknown language at the time, which only the priest could interpret. And they would interpret it in pithy rhymes for the eager pilgrim. Perhaps the most famous was when Alexander the Great went to Delphi, and his prophecy was, "My son, none shall resist thee." And he went on to be the greatest conqueror and general of the ancient world. But not always would the oracle speak so clearly. Many times it was quite an enigma what was really being said. What would seem to be a positive response could often turn out to be negative. This is Lourdes in France, southern France, and the foothills of the Pyrenees. Just to give you a wide range of the sacred sites in Europe. This city only came to prominence in the mid-1800s when a young French peasant girl started having visions of the Virgin Mary at this site. 18 in all, and townspeople came out and witnessed several of them. The most famous was when the apparition had told young Bernadette to dig in a certain spot. So the girl obeyed and she started digging, and the townspeople started to ridicule her, and she paid no attention and kept digging. An hour or two later, she continued digging, and a well sprung up from the site, which is the object of all the pilgrims today. Over 5 million pilgrims, Christian pilgrims, go to Lourdes each year to receive holy blessings in the hopes of being cured of whatever ails them. The Christian Church, Catholic Church, has acknowledged that over 50 miracles have occurred at Lourdes, and some people say up to in the thousands of incurable diseases, people being healed here. And I would just like to point out that just your reception to many of these sacred sites for no other reason that you believe that there is something very powerful happening here is probably more important than the site itself. So just being open and receptive when you travel to these sacred sites can bring out quite a bit more about them than just the pretty facade. I think you guys have moved the projector a little bit. No problem.
How's that?
That's pretty good. So I'm just going to move quickly through the rest of the world and point out some sites here. This is the region in northern Chad and southern Algeria where these very old petroglyphs have been found, including one site where several petroglyphs depict characters with mushrooms on their heads and their hands, perhaps suggesting some sort of psychedelic mushroom cult of 10,000 years ago. In the northern Ethiopia region is the sacred Coptic city of Axum, with several early Christian churches carved right out of the hewn rock, and a historic route which connects to several of these. Now the Coptics are a very interesting group. They were the first Christians that left the Holy Land, and they proposed that they preach the true doctrine of Christ, who spoke of karma, reincarnation, and several other things that are not recognized by the Catholic Church today. In the, I believe it was the 4th century, the Nicene Creed pretty much edited out all that material of the Bible and is left with a fairly watered down version compared to what the Coptics believe. Ethiopia is kind of a hot spot right now. They're going through civil war, so Axum may or may not be open. I didn't talk too much about sacred mountains, but there are quite a few around the world, and some of the most important ones are described in my book. But in Africa is Mount Kilimanjaro, the largest single standing mountain in the world, so large of a volcano that the weight visibly depresses the mantle of the earth, and was called the residence of gods and many things to the local people. Another great mystery of Africa is the walled city of Great Zimbabwe, the southern part of the continent. No lore from the neighboring tribes speak anything of it. It may have been a mining city from Solomon's times, perhaps his wealthy gold mines. It may have been even older than that. Nobody really knows what it is. But the most important thing in Great Zimbabwe is a large conical cone, perhaps symbolizing a granary. And South America, very ancient city, Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca. In the 1980s, I believe it was, underwater scientists detected several structures, walls, roads, and some buildings when the lake was in drought, suggesting a very old civilization once existed here, predating the Incans even. Very interesting thing about Tiwanaku is there is the beginning of a pyramid with almost the exact same dimensions as the Great Pyramid. It was never completed. They only got a few meters off the ground, but certainly a pyramid was under construction in Tiwanaku, as well as many very mysterious relics there in that city. But perhaps, of course, we all know Machu Picchu and Cusco have very old relics, especially Cusco, extremely large walls and saxahuman, some of the finest cut stones in the world. But perhaps the biggest mystery that's on all of our minds is Easter Island. And who built these statues on this little speck of a volcanic island in the South Pacific Ocean? One feature that remains congruent through all the statues, and there's hundreds of these statues on the island, some of them were built on platforms, and the wall platforms were very similar to walls that were also erected in Tiwanaku and Cusco. This is from the Rano Ronoko crater where these statues were quarried. These being some of the oldest ones. But the congruent feature of all these statues was one, these elongated heads, and very long ears. These bodies actually go all the way down, feature the figure with crossed hands like this. No legs, it just kind of stumps out right there at the bottom of the torso. But these long ears are very suggestive of who may have built these statues. When the Spanish conquistadors first came to South America, they found that the Incan holy men also had very long ears. And these were done by putting similar to earring in the ear and extending it by putting tortilla reeds inside them. Similar practice here on Easter Island. But what the Dutch sailors found when they discovered Easter Island in 1722 was that there were two races of people living together. And at the time the Dutch came, they were living together quite harmoniously. One race was very similar to the Polynesians as we know them today. Dark hair, fairly dark skin, and brown eyes. The other group of people were Caucasian. Some of them with red hair, fair skin, and multicolored eyes. The next group to come to the island, some 50 years after the Dutch, were the Spanish to annex the island. At that time, they discovered that these people had their own writing style, a hieroglyphic writing that is still yet to be deciphered, and a very old legacy of high culture, those that built the statue, the long-eared people. One thing that the Spanish did was leave firearms. So when Captain Cook arrived 4 years later, there had been much anarchy on the island, and the Polynesians pretty much won control of the island and exterminated all of the long-ears, and also desecrated the statues and toppled the ones over that were on the platforms. However, today there are still some regressive genes on Easter Island. There are a few native people who have red hair and multicolored eyes and fair skin, suggesting the legacy of the long-ears. And in Central America, many more pyramids. The most famous being built by the Mayan people during the Classic Age. Down here we have Palenque, Tikal, Copan. And in the post-Classic Mayan Age, when the Mayans intermingled with the Toltec people from the north, you have Uxmal, Tulum, and Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza also being a calendar in stone. There are 91 steps on each one of the four sides, adding up to 364. The final step into the inner sanction being the 365th day. On the summer solstice, there is a shadow of a serpent which creeps up the side of the pyramid, which is quite amazing to see. And several of the Mayan priests, timekeepers of the most accurate calendar yet to be devised, were performed up here, as well as very bloodthirsty rituals, which could have been the combining of the Toltec culture, but some of those other ceremonies were also taking place in the Classic Mayan Age, including the ball game called Pok-to-Pok, which the losing team would pay by losing their head, basically. Quite a bloody game, but seemed to be part of the ritual. When the Spanish first came, Chichen Itza was already in a state of disrepair. It had already passed its prime. It was nearly completely abandoned, and nobody knows what happened to the Mayan people. This is a shot of Palenque from the Classic Mayan period. This city was designed and built by an emperor named Pakal. And in the 1950s, an archaeologist found a secret stairway descending all the way down to ground level. And Pakal's tomb is just behind the staircase here, richly engraved with Mayan hieroglyphics and a very mysterious sarcophagus. The top of the sarcophagus shows Pakal in a somewhat compromising position, which some people interpret him to be riding on a spaceship. Others say he's descending to heaven. But nonetheless, Pakal was a great ruler whose prophecy would extend into this modern age, when he would then again be known to the rest of the world, according to Mayan prophecies. And here's the map of the Earth grid I put in the book. This is based on several other books that I've read on this Earth grid. And these main intersection points harbor some of the oldest civilizations on Earth: Mohenjo-daro, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, as well as differences in the Earth, such as the seismic activity in the Pacific Rim, the oil field, richest oil field in Siberia, Lake Baikal, the deepest lake in the world, and the Bermuda Triangle and Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So it corresponds to the physical features of the planet, as well as some of the oldest monuments. So whomever built in this very old age presumably had a knowledge of how the Earth was one living organism, such as the Greeks put forth with the Gaia hypothesis. Much of this is still speculation that ley lines even exist, but it just shows an interesting correlation to some of the most mysterious places on the planet, as well as the buildup of an ancient scientific instrument which may have been used to geomance from these sites. One very mysterious spot in the world, which I describe in the book, is this place called Malden Island, middle of nowhere. The nearest inhabited island are the Christmas Islands, over 1,000 miles away. But on Malden Island are step platforms and paved roads, paved being large fitted stones, which extend directly into the ocean. There's some similar ones to that on some other islands south of there, and also Non-Modal, with the earliest European explorers called the Venice of the Pacific, which is a channeled city with enormous walls of magnetized stone. If you put a compass in Non-Modal in some of these largest temple, it'll just spin out of control. There's also passageways that go way down deep in the ocean, and rumors of some more lost cities in the harbor right next to Non-Modal, which I describe in the book. So just to wrap up tonight's lecture, to talk about Ayers Rock being the red center of Australia, the center point for the Aboriginal people when they would get into a trance-like state. They could visualize the planetscape, and in their lucid moments of dream time could visualize what they called song lines, which are also now described as ley lines, or the energy lines of the planet. And in times of antiquity, before white settlers came, the Aboriginal people were known to congregate at certain places within the inhospitable Australian desert telepathically. They would just come from all parts of the continent, meet for a certain period of time, have a festival of music and dance, and would then disperse until they would meet again. So that's it. That concludes my lecture, and I think we have 5 or 10 minutes. If y'all want to ask me some questions, be happy to answer them for you. Thank you. Anybody have any questions about all that? Yeah.
When you mentioned an illuminating experience that happened to you on the pyramid, do you mention it in the book? And if so, could you tell us
in this
about
book, I haven't, just because it does, my subjective experiences don't quite pertain to the objectivity I wanted to give to the pyramid. But I did talk about it. I wrote a short story in Search of Adventure, the travel anthology book. But it was pretty amazing. Have to read about it. Yeah.
Oh, what's your top 5?
Top 5 sacred sites in the world? Well, as you can probably tell, I have a inkling towards the pyramid fields of the world. Great Pyramid undoubtedly being the #1 site, but also some of the older cities such as Tiwanaku, Mohenjo-daro, and some of the places of pilgrimage such as the Ganges River or different mountains such as Mount Kailash in Tibet. Very sacred sites that continue to be visited. I mean, I could literally talk for hours on all the places in the book. I can only touch upon about 15 or 20 tonight, but it's 101 in the book, so a lot of reading for y'all. Any other questions?
What about sacred sites in U.S.?
Quite a few. Again, just didn't have the time to touch on them, but just to rattle them off, we have Mount Shasta, the Mission Trail, which is the first major road on the West Coast, Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, the vortexes in Sedona, Cahokia Mountains in Illinois, which are very reminiscent of Mayan cities of another mysterious culture that existed in the Midwest called the Mississippian culture of the mound builders. There's another site in New Hampshire called America's Stonehenge, which has similar alignments, stone circles and old ruins. And then Bimini and Atlantis region down in South Florida, where more underwater ruins have been uncovered, and Edgar Cayce had a number of prophecies about that being another location of the Atlantean culture. Okay, yes?
Do you personally follow a certain path now, perhaps Buddhism or something as a result of this searching and these travels?
I find beauty and truth in all religions of the world, but I can't particularly ascribe myself to any one. And but I have had very profound moments, like the one at the Great Pyramid, which have proven to me personally that there's something else out there that needs to be explored. Before my time in India and Egypt, I was an atheist and a scientist, and everything had to be proven, and then I had an incredibly moving experience, which has led me to believe that there's a little bit more than just this third-dimensional reality here. Okay, Jillian, last question.
I was going to ask you, how do you define a sacred site or sacred place?
I put that in the introduction to the book, and it's basically on the pilgrimage value in the modern age, how important it was in ancient times for natural places like Lake Baikal or the Amazon rainforest or sacred mountains around the world, is their ongoing importance to either the people of the region or, in the case of the Amazon rainforest, to the whole world, life-giving properties. So that's one way. Okay, everyone, thank you very much for coming. I'm going to be up here to sign copies. I'll also have some flyers for cheap tickets, and if anybody wants to sign up for the Peace Tour, we have mailing lists and volunteer lists.
Thank you very much. If you could please form a line on this aisle, that would be very helpful. To your left.
Sure, no, but if you care to sign up, I'd be happy to. Oh yeah? Oh really? Nice. Say Babaji attends those once in a while.
enjoy life a little bit. See the world at the same time.
These days about 20% a year.
Oh, which is less than I would have.
Yeah, it's only because I'm so busy with the organization and doing the book thing. What's your name?
Oh, Sue.
Up front.
And a lefty. I should have guessed that before I saw you right.
Oh, I gotta sign it on this side. Authors sign it right there. But, yeah.
No, it's a better side.
Yeah.
I brought this one too.
Oh,
I'm
great.
Rich Susan, you know me from Randy Lyman?
Yeah, yeah. Just saw Randy on Saturday at our party.
I had another funny story. I was in, you might know this, might have gotten it, but I was in Maine this summer, and I took a, like, whatever weird van thing from New Hampshire to Maine with Bruce's aunt. See you later.
Sure. Thanks for coming out tonight. What's your name?
Morty.
M-A-U-R-E.
M-A-U-R-E-E-N. It was interesting. I was listening to you speaking, but I realized I had caught one of your talks I wrote a book like about 3 years ago.
Oh yeah, which one?
Yeah. For your adventure travels, when we were sharing with us about blood runners and kind of getting all of that started.
All right, that was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Hi.
Hi, what's up? My name is Erwin.
Hi, Erwin.
How are you doing? Well, I like to travel. Well, I wanted to know, I'm going backpacking.
Please.
Yeah, I'm going backpacking around Europe, probably this May. Would you know
The bookstores preferred that I keep the lecture to 45 minutes with 15 minutes of questions and answers. Ideally, this lecture should go to 90 minutes with 15 minutes of questions and answers afterwards, as well as book signings following the question and answers series. I am the executive director and founder of the World Peace Through Technology organization, which has just been granted its nonprofit status in San Francisco. The aim of the World Peace Through Technology organization is to travel around the country and then around the world in what we call the Peace Tour. And the website for this organization is peacetour.com and peacetour.org. The mission statement of the group is to inspire world peace through the benevolent uses of technology. And what we will do is provide a mobile showcase gallery at remote locations and do live netcast feeds to demonstrate benevolent technology to lesser privileged people of the world. This project is still several years off, so that is why I'm putting together this promotional video to tell you about the lecture series I would like to do across America, preferably at college campuses, promoting sacred places, as well as giving an overlook of what the Peace Tour is all about. Thank you for watching this presentation, and I hope we will speak soon. Thank you.